That's how you got down originally. Period. I heard the new you did. Yep. And they dissing you in the movie. You in the movie getting dissing. You gotta eat it, sitting in the crowd and everything. You ever see somebody from Harlem try to act like they from Harlem so bad that you gotta keep saying, I'm from... You wasn't there.
I was the CEO of Diplomats. I made Diplomats with him. I was with him forever.
Was Jim. That wasn't Cam. You know what I'm saying?
Cam was like the Jay-Z.
Cam was the artist.
After you heard all these mixtapes. That's how you got in. Mase actually taught you how.
From the gang, right? All the gang all ran under Jim.
Right.
All of the muscle.
The truth is a serious thing, no matter how you look at it. The truth is what the truth is.
Jim Jones just received the worst conceivable criticism. The entire Dipset scenario was turned upside down when Cameron and Maya revealed ruthless receipts, direct messages, phone logs, and videos. On social media, the same group of people who previously created Harlem's golden age just revealed one another. Jim now appears to be the antagonist in his own history. The strangest aspect is that it appears Jim may have been lying to his admirers the entire time. The more you examine these receipts, Harlem streets are once again buzzing. But this time the topic isn't fly bars or fashion. It has to do with shame, receipts, and betrayal. Fans are calling the Dipset demolition what Jim Jones woke up to. The two men who formerly stood side by side with Jim as members of the most famous movement in Harlem, Cameron and Mahi, have turned the tables on him and spoken out against him, revealing what they refer to as the truth. It all began when Cam shared a late-night video on Instagram that appeared to be voice memos and old text messages from Jim. "Don't rewrite history, bro," reads the caption. The internet went crazy over that one line. It is what it is. M joined in on it within hours. He and Cam co-host the podcast. The two proceeded to show past contracts, screenshots, and interviews in which they said Jim attempted to claim credit for Dipset movements that weren't actually his. Fans dubbed it a straight-up public execution, while they termed it a correction of the record. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like #receipts by Cam and #JimXexposed, as users reposted videos and memes of Jim in previous interviews looking shocked. When your old film turns into reaction content, you know something is wrong. There has always been tension, as you are aware if you are familiar with the Dipset plot. The visionary was Cam. Mase was a mentor who later became a rival. Additionally, Jim was a devoted soldier who rose through the ranks. But the question raised by this fresh batch of receipts is, was Jim ever as loyal as he made himself out to be? Because Jim didn't simply switch sides in Cam and Maddie's opinion. He is accused of fabricating the entire tale to portray himself as the hero while pretending to be a victim in private. And that's the kind of charge that damages reputations in addition to starting arguments. What exactly were the receipts that they dropped then? Why did it strike Jim so forcefully this time? Let's examine the information that recently completely changed the narrative of Harlem. Cameron flung the entire wardrobe into the street when he released those screenshots, not just venting his personal problems. A late-night post with a few mysterious text messages between him and Jim Jones, at first with no caption. But fans understood exactly what it meant. According to the communications, Jim is pleading with Cam for permission to use the Dipset name for a business transaction, which Cam denied ever approving. Then the bombshell arrived. Jim was accused by Cam of passing Verzu's talks and lying to fans about being the driving force behind Dipset's reunion tour. The next day, Cam put in even more effort on Instagram Live, declaring, "I created this brand from the ground up. I made sure everyone ate, yet I turn into the villain the minute I refuse." The tone was surgical rather than merely disappointed, and Ma quickly intervened to clarify that Jim had been contacting people behind the scenes to close agreements without Cam's consent. He referred to it as Harlem politics at its best, before saying, "You can't fake receipts, bro," which caused everyone to repost. Clips from their It Is What It Is podcast began making the rounds within a few hours. Mase and Cam weren't merely making jokes. They included timestamps, dates, and even voice notes in which Jim purportedly acknowledged avoiding them while in business. The fans were going crazy. "This isn't a beef, this is a full audit," read one response. Because they were so intimate, the receipts also struck a chord. Cam wasn't merely accusing Jim of unethical behavior. He claimed that Jim attempted to alter Dipset's past to claim credit for Cam's initial agreements, his trademark concepts, and even the early musical relationships that helped to establish the Dipset empire. Additionally, Jim said nothing when those videos became viral, just silence. No tweets, no lives, no denials. Additionally, silence is loud in the hip-hop community. Others claimed he was simply waiting to retaliate. while fans interpreted it as a hint he was caught lacking. But this tale doesn't end with a few text messages, because Mase didn't only support Cam when he jumped in. He included his own vicious receipts, which damaged Jim's image. This whole situation escalated from drama to destruction when Mase entered the fray. Mase kicked the door off its hinges after Cam had already busted it open. On their podcast, It Is What It Is, the two Harlem veterans sat next to each other, appearing composed and a bit too eager to speak. "Let's show them what we're talking about," Mase murmured as he leaned in with that iconic smirk. Then he released what supporters are referring to as the brutal receipts. The screenshots and old text first surfaced in which Jim allegedly minimized Cam's contribution to commercial transactions while promoting his own. Then Mase played a supposed audio recording from a few years ago in which Jim was heard griping about not receiving the deference he was due from Cam and Mase. Online users went crazy. Within minutes, people were making it into memes, remixing it, and reciting it. But Mase's following statement was the true knockout blow. Jim wanted to be the boss, but he didn't build the building, he said to the crowd. That line spread more quickly than wildfire. "Jim ain't build the building" became popular on X in a matter of hours, and everyone began taking sides, including hip-hop pages and Harlem aficionados. Mase continued after that. He went further and purportedly produced a picture of an old check counterfoil from the early days of the Dipset that showed that Jim wasn't even named as a partner on one of their largest early projects. According to Mase, people talk about legacy, but documents don't lie. The message was cold-blooded, but the delivery was composed. The comments beneath each clip were now in complete disarray. Mase was being called petty by some. He was receiving praise for sticking to the truth. But regardless of how you look at it, Jim Jones was in a difficult situation. The same men who helped establish his reputation, loyalty, hustle, and Harlem pride were now disparaging him.
What was bad about it? Jim said nothing. Once more, just a man browsing social media with his name burning. Not even a story post. However, friendship was no longer the only factor at play here. It has to do with credibility, because the streets cease speculating about who is correct and begin to wonder who is real when the men who forced you start disclosing your past. And that's precisely where this story is going to go next. How this feud becomes personal due of the Harlem realness questions. It is necessary to turn back time to truly see why this affected Jim Jones so strongly. The group Dipset was more than just a rap act in the early 2000s. There was a movement. Jim was riding shotgun alongside Cameron and Jules Santana in the midst of Harlem's pride and loud fashion. However, rumors circulated even then that Jim was constantly taking sides. You see, Jim was the soldier who aspired to be a general, Cam was the architect, and Mai was the foundation. He was devoted, boisterous, and always willing to ride, making him the crew's muscle. However, as time went on, that loyalty began to resemble ambition more. The rumors that Jim was planning solo moves behind Cam's back are still vivid in the minds of fans. He quit hustling, began promoting his Vamp Life brand, and gradually started establishing his own business. Leveling up is fine, but the way he did it made people look at him strangely. When Dipset began to crumble, the cracks became clearly visible. Jim was outside conducting interviews, taking pictures, and asserting that he was the one upholding the legacy, while Cam fell silent and Mate became pious. At that point, supporters were aware of a trend. Jim always managed to rekindle the conflict whenever Cam or Mate attempted to make amends. He was unable to avoid being in the middle of the mayhem. And Jim portrayed himself as the catalyst for Dipset's eventual reunion for performances and their verse with the Locks years later. However, Cam and Mate are now claiming that was never the case in light of these new receipts, that Jim was manipulating the narrative and engaging in backroom negotiations to present himself as the hero. This new round of exposure hurts so much because of this. Clout is not the only factor. Credibility is the key. Jim has consistently presented himself as the devoted Harlem hustler who saved Dipset's life, but these receipts paint him as the opportunist who changed the course of history. "The streets don't love you," the game once remarked, and Jim is currently experiencing that lesson directly. because the respect you've earned over the past 20 years may be destroyed in an instant when your own crew begins grabbing files. And that's precisely what's taking place, since Jim never wanted to hear the question that the streets of Harlem are now posing. Did he ever truly belong to that group? The last thing you can afford is for Harlem to turn against you when your entire identity is based on its genuineness. But Jim Jones is currently experiencing precisely that. The street began muttering and then yelling that Jim's reputation might not be as impenetrable as he claimed when Cam and Mate showed those receipts. Social media users who support Harlem didn't hold back. According to one widely shared tweet, Jim was the muscle, not the mind master. The empire was founded by Cam. It was styled by Machai. Jim just arrived at work.
Some questioned whether Jim's "hole from the block" reputation was fabricated for the cameras. Although it may sound trivial, reputation is money in Harlem, and everything else begins to fall apart the moment your street cred is called into question. After that, there were think pieces, Reddit discussions, YouTube analyses, and individuals breaking down the history of the Dipset as if it were a real-life crime case. People began extracting previous interviews, contrasting statements, and identifying discrepancies in Jim's account of what happened. Jim Jones has been rewriting the history of Harlem for years, read a post that received thousands of likes. Mahi and Cam simply hit undo. According to some of the city's original residents, Jim always had ambition, but lacked the leadership skills to support it. When the word opportunist began to circulate, it became poisonous in hip-hop, particularly when it originates from your peers rather than your detractors. This is when things go horribly wrong, though. Jim is stoking the flames with his silence. He doesn't reply each day. The story progresses until he is unable to react, because what can he say if those receipts are authentic? Any denial only puts Cam or Maha at risk of revealing additional evidence. Additionally, industry insiders are apparently beginning to distance themselves from him, as fans are busy mocking him online. Some promoters have even put a halt to reunion negotiations, claiming they don't want to become involved in family business. In other words, Jim's brand is becoming radioactive. At this stage, survival is more important than ego. Because the empire you helped create begins to resemble a house of cards when the streets turn against you, your brothers abandon you, and rap no longer defends you. Furthermore, the fallout is still ongoing. Because what fans are saying online isn't the only thing causing harm. It's what this implies for Jim's upcoming actions, endeavors, and hip-hop legacy. This feud is more than simply drama on social media. For Jim Jones, it's a complete branding catastrophe, because perspective is crucial in hip-hop. Even if you lose money and recover, there is no strong enough branding to make up for the culture's perception of you as false, and Jim is currently dealing with that. The implications of these receipts, according to industry insiders, might hurt his career more severely than any diss track ever could. Recall that Jim used business endeavors, reality TV, apparel, podcasts, and guest appearances to build his second act. However, sponsors become very concerned very quickly when your name is trending alongside exposed, dishonest, and fraudulent. Fans are already pointing out that since this went viral, there have been no rumors of brand partnerships, reunion plans, or collaborations. He is also being struck musically by it. Jim has released songs quite frequently over the previous few years, but nostalgia was the main factor in his attraction. He is regarded as one of the final legends of Harlem Street. That picture is now completely broken. Fans will quit streaming the music if they lose faith in the narrative.